Grippy. I'm the Executive Director of Cope Family Center. And we are thrilled to have you here for part 2 of our RYSEs, ACEs, and Health Equity series. This training series comes to you, we're co-sponsoring it with a ton of people, so bear with me as I go through the list. Resilient Napa, which is a project of Cope Family Center. Greater Bay Area CAPC, which is the Child Abuse Prevention Council. So there's 10 counties and we come together and work on regional issues. Of course, our host, Napa Valley College, Strategies, that is here helping us. We're one of 3 sites. There's another one in Richmond and there's also another one in Contra Costa, in Concord. And oh, and it's also Mental Health Awareness Month. So this screening and speaker tonight or today are brought to you by Napa County Mental Health as one of the Mental Health Awareness Month activities. So I want to tell you just a little bit about Resilient Napa before I turn it over to Deborah to tell you a little bit more about the rest of the agenda for the day. Resilient Napa is a community movement and collaboration that's really looking at how we can build a more resilient Napa through providing education and community involvement around the prevention of adverse childhood experiences, respect and social inclusion, as we look at how we're going to change systems and the way that we interact in our community. So this is one of the trainings we have. We're going to have many more trainings coming up and have different community events. We have a website, resilientnapa.org. You can go on that website, sign up for our newsletter, and that will keep you up to date with all of the activities that we'll be doing here. I think that's all I have, and I'll turn it over to Deborah from Strategies.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. So like Michelle mentioned, this series is really a joint project in collaboration with a variety of partners. And what we really wanted to do with Strategies 2.0 is make sure that because we are a statewide agency, that we are partnering with local networks to honor the work that's already being done in the Bay Area community. So a little bit about Strategies 2.0. My name is Deborah Sun. I'm actually the Bay Area Learning Communities Facilitator for the Bay Area region. And Strategies 2.0 is a statewide organization based in Sacramento that's dedicated to, let me change the slide here, dedicated to providing capacity building opportunities and support for professionals who are working in the child abuse prevention or family strengthening fields. And it's actually a collaboration between the Child Abuse Prevention Center, Children's Bureau, and San Diego State University. And all of our services are free. So the learning community is just one piece of the work that Strategies actually does. We also provide trainings, technical assistance, consultation around organizational development, professional development, et cetera. So like I mentioned, we are in the Bay Area region. And we are actually, Strategies 2.0 works in collaboration with the Contra Costa County Child Abuse Prevention Council to bring you this local learning communities. So because we are the Greater Bay Area region, we want to make sure and allow our learning communities to be as accessible as possible for the Bay Area folks. So while here in Napa, we are the hub site, what we call the hub site, we are actually live streaming the event, which is why there's a camera right in front of me. And so the 2 other sites that are in real time watching us and participating are Richmond and a site in Salinas. So you'll notice that we'll take intentional pauses for making sure that we're including these sites and allowing them to also participate as we're moving forward. Michelle, did you want to talk a little bit about the resilience film?
All right, so we're going to start our 3 hours together. The first hour we're going to be watching the resilience documentary. It looks at how adverse childhood experiences impact our lives as we grow up through school, the relationships we have, or how we work with one another. And it's about 56 minutes. I've seen it about 28 times, and every time I see it, I leave feeling a little more hopeful and inspired and catch something new in the documentary. It does have the potential, when we're talking about childhood adversity, and it has the potential to trigger, may trigger you in some way. If that's the case, then please reach out to myself or Deborah, and we can talk with you a little bit about that and make sure that we process through that. And then after the screening, we will be inviting our guest speaker up and be a little bit more interactive. All right, so enjoy the movie. All right, we're going to jump right in, and I am very pleased to introduce the Executive Director of the RYSE Center from Richmond, Kanwarpal Dhaliwal, and she's going to talk to us today about the 3 R's of systems change. Yep.
Or not.
If anyone would like translation services, we have a wonderful translator here, Sarah. For Spanish translation, thank you. Now.
Hello. Hi, can you hear me okay? And hello, everybody out there. I will do my best to make eye contact. I know that's important. But it's great to be here this afternoon. Again, my name is Kanwarpal Dhaliwal. I'm the Associate Director for RYSE. My pronouns are she and her. And I want to start with just inviting us to take a moment of intentional breathing before we go into the rest of that meeting. Let's take a minute in silence. Breathe as deep as comfortable. About 3 more breaths, come back into the room, keep breathing, please come back. Thank you. I do that very much for myself, all right, to help sort of get the nerves settled a bit, but I also think it's always an important practice, just as we transition, but also we just watch something pretty heavy. And some of us might have seen that for the 20th time, the 10th time, or the first time. I just also want to acknowledge that there's always different parts that can sort of hit or resonate, because every day, every view is different. So I just wanted to also sort of know and acknowledge that what we saw, it's not just a paradigm shift, it's exciting, but it also really brings up the sort of the potency of the pain as a culture that we're in, and there's a lot of work to do, but also a lot of opportunity in this, the science that we have now. I've shared this before. Some of you, I'm looking in the room, some of you out there have been in rooms with me, and what I like to offer is, as we spend the time that we have together, is really to engage and be in a relationship in the spirit of beloved community. That everybody that is in this room, in my view, on camera, we're all meant to be here. It's the perfect configuration of people. And it's the perfect configuration that has been able to be here by the survival and fortitude of our righteous ancestors. And I want to honor and acknowledge the ancestors who've allowed me to be here, to be on this stage with you all. But really in that spirit of we all belong here, we belong to each other, we're responsible to each other. But we also then can take sort of solace, peace, and predictability, and that we are going to be held. So in that spirit, we're going to go through that because I'm going to talk about some stuff that, some stuff that's not the easiest, some stuff that might push on our boundaries, on our assumptions, on our thinking. But we know that the work of systems change is the work of resilience. There's also resistance. It is always a relationship. And I would add a fourth one. I thought of this on the way here. I would also add a risk. We have to take risks to shift systems because we have to take risks to shift to the dehumanization. So I talked about beloved community. I don't know how this is going to work technically, but I do my best to not just be the only voice in the room, although I know I will be talking a lot. So can I ask, I don't know if we can use a mic here, for someone to read this first quote out loud. Yes.
Can I have a switch to this mic?
Yes.
We're going to see if it fixes an issue.
Oh, okay. Hold that. Hold that thought.
Or use this one or this one? Okay. If you just want to say a few words to say hello to our online audience to make sure they can hear.
Hello, onliners.
Say, how does it,
Can you hear me?
is there an echo? So
Is there an echo? Do I sound beloved? Okay, unless I hear otherwise, I'll keep it moving. So we had a lovely volunteer to read the first paragraph.
Our goal is to create a beloved community, and this will require a qualitative change in our souls as well as a quantitative change in our lives.
Thank you. What's your name?
Tanya,
Thank you, Tanya. And could I have a volunteer read the second quote out loud? Thank you.
the beloved community is formed not by the eradication of difference, but by its affirmation, by each of us claiming the identities and cultural legacies that shape who we are and how we live in the world.
Thank you. And your name?
Jenny.
Jenny? Thank you, Jenny. And the last quote up here, could I get someone to read? Yes, thank you.
The larger your beloved community, the more you can accomplish in the world. Not
Thank you. And your name?
Kate.
Thank you, Kate. Tanya, Jenny, and Kate, thank you for being our first volunteers. You're out of the way now unless you want to keep talking. So again, really grateful to be in the beloved community. We truly believe everywhere we go, everywhere everyone we're with, that is the gift, the opportunity, and the obligation. So let me tell you or show you a little bit about RYSE. This is a 2-minute, what we call our RYSE commercial. So again, some of you know what we do, what we're about, but we always feel like it's important that you could hear directly from our young people what RYSE is.
There's 2 chapters, yeah.
It's a place where you can come and not have to deal with stuff that's happening out in the street or violence.
It's a happy environment, everybody gets to everybody, it's all love, everybody gets positive.
Everybody, you know, how that stuff, that's real separate, makes you want to do it.
You get so many different people to go together and create, come in one space. I wanted to rap, record music, and have computer and things, right? Where the reality is
All the actions for advice and research. You stuff here, you stuff, you not know that.
Yeah, it started off really bad. And when somebody was arrived, they helped me in school, they helped me in my career. The thing is really to me like what I can do wrong. Everything here is when the show is just approach, they don't look at you for what you've done in the past or anything like that.
Yeah, I became an intern, so I had to change the way I do school. I started to be my makeup. I don't just stay at home and make the editor.
We have to organize Italian club, where a whole bunch of youth from the surrounding community come together and pitch campaigns on how they want to change whatever it is in the community. RYSE's goal is to empower youth to make change.
I ultimately believe RYSE is here to expand young people's minds and show them what else the world has to offer.
People should come to RYSE because there's something for everybody at RYSE. Like there's a space for every single person in the community to be able to do something out of RYSE.
RYSE has so many things to teach you. Give you so many different rules. RYSE definitely helps you realize that I can actually do something, that I can accomplish without having to do my mind.
Thing about being resilient is we're adaptive, responsive, right? We whatever is presented to us, we can regulate or co-regulate. So working it out. I will share. Come over here. I will share. So there's a few reasons we show this video. As I mentioned, one is that it's really important. I'm an adult. If you've assumed otherwise or not. And I work for a youth organization, and our work is really centered the lived experiences, expertise, and priorities of young people of color. So in my work and in my role, in my allyship, in my accomplishment with young people, it's important where I can that they're in the room with me. And what they've told us is when you go out and talk about who we are, we can't be with you. We don't always want to be with you, but we think it's important for folks to hear from us directly. And so that's why we always share this in the spaces that we're in. The other piece is that we hear over and over again that our young people in Richmond, one of the hardest things that they navigate is the media narrative about who they are and who they're not, right? So Channel 2, Channel 4, basically whatever news outlet, any news about Richmond is about crime, it's about risk, right? It's about some kind of danger or threat. So that's all they're seen as. And so that in itself feels just as harmful to them, just as stressful as if they have interpersonal conflict in their family at school. And so as an organization then, why we really know systems change is so critical is that if we're just focusing on behavioral change of individuals, we're not actually addressing the conditions that facilitate the need for coping and this sort of behavior and interpersonal. And so we need to intervene the news and the media just as much as we need to sort of help intervene and heal and repair sort of behavior and relationship. And so that's, I think, really important to name that. I think the documentary really shows the impact of different stressors and different experiences. It's the strongest kind of science we have to show the correlation between adversity, metabolic health, etc. And we also know that all of it's informed by the conditions we're in, and by our history, and by our legacy, and by our structures. I don't want to hit anything. So I wanted to share also a bit about the conditions and context in which we do our work, the conditions and context that drive our vision, our values. We often talk about, we really feel like our work in systems change is to be tender and strident. Tender in our relationships, strident in our values, and in our sort of demand and unapologetic sort of aim for liberation and freedom. And how we do that will look different in different spaces. We have to meet people where they are, just like we meet our young people where they are. But our work is really sort of how do we move together and not stay where we are, because we need to make those shifts. So I've already sort of shared that part of what we see is that in our work, there is just an incessant focus on changing behaviors and changing individuals. And that is juxtaposed with a glaring absence of the structures and conditions that create violence and harm. So for us, if we are just trying to get young people to behave, to be compliant, to follow the rules, to be compliant, to follow rules and systems that have been set up to dehumanize them, we are doing just as much harm. So as an organization, we have to name that. We have to struggle in then what it means to hold accountability, hold support, but we have to be crystal clear and precise that the behaviors that have to be changed are those of the systems. And unless we change those, we cannot put the same scrutiny or penalty on young people or on individuals or the communities our young people are in. Talked about this, the dominant narratives of people of color, young people of color, how we are posited, risk, disease, threat. And that, again, it often doesn't get in the violence prevention work that we do. We never talk about the media violence, right? The violence of representation and misrepresentation. And so a lot of our work at RYSE, as you saw in the video, was about us affirming and creating and asserting our own narratives, right? What would it mean for the news to actually show that video of what's going on in Richmond versus waiting for there to be a problem or an episode of violence or harm, right? It doesn't diminish or take away that that's happening, but what we're seeing is that resilience is like, it's a no-brainer. We actually don't need to create that as a benchmark, as I put on the last, like it is actually the baseline. And I think that's where when we talk about systems change, we have to be really clear that the systems and our work with young people is too often ensconced in these values and these subjectivities of being good middle-class white people. That if the kids in Bayview who are experiencing acute violence, chronic stress and violence could just sort of regulate their emotions, then we don't have to do anything about the conditions, right? We don't have to do anything about displacement or gentrification. The same for our young people in Richmond, and we can pretty much name any city that we're in the Bay Area. So if we can just regulate, co-regulate, whatever that means so they can stay compliant, then we see that as success. But what we know is that young people, what that often means is young people aren't connected, they don't feel connected, they feel despair, and their coping takes on sort of ways in which they either get externalized or internalized, but not held and like held with witness bearing and love and empathy and affirmation. It's deep, it's real deep. And so, you know, we also know even when young people, we have, you know, members who come to us because they're on probation, they need to do community service hours. We have members who have experienced lethal injury. We have members who are straight A students, right? And both. We have members who smoke weed every day, right? And it's all of that. I was one of those members when I was young that did all of that. So my coping with some of it was deemed as sort of compliant, which is a good student, and some stuff, most of my parents don't know, would be deemed as, you know, acting out, risky behavior. But what I know is that at the point in my life, and I'll share this story in terms of context and conditions, is that I worked really hard growing up in a land of racial terror and domestic violence, as if I could just be compliant, if I could just follow every rule, then one, I wouldn't be targeted, right? At least like I wouldn't be sort of seen, but at the same time, maybe I would be recognized, right? So it's a really hard place to be because I kind of want to be invisibilized, but I kind of not want to, right? So I did all kinds of things, but it was the point at which I actually decided my compliance is too harmful, and that's not how I said it to my 16-year-old self. I can say this, you know, looking back, is actually when I felt better. So when I actually started doing the things that seem like you're acting out in school, out of compliance, I physically felt better. I felt my sense of agency increase, right? So all these things, these metrics that we look around wellness, social emotional learning, I did everything that wasn't that, and that actually made me feel better. So we have to flip our metrics, right? Our frameworks. And again, we have to do this in relationship. It can't just be, I'm going to go to a system and agitate a system and tell our school system, you have to like do all this now. I mean, it's not going to happen that way practically. But part of it is like, how do we sort of unlearn, right? What it means to sort of to be trained, to be formally trained in youth development. What you learn in youth development is you actually have to, you don't get to be in sort of humanity with young people. You're not even supposed to say, I love you to a young person when all this work is it's about love. It's about relationship. But as a trained person, I'm not supposed to say that. But that's a very adultist view. So again, our context and conditions have to be named, right? Because it's that deep, it's that insidious. And even every day, sometimes I'm like, where did I show up in a way that was adultist, that was ableist, right? That was racist. Like all of those things I'm thinking about. But also, where did I show up where maybe because of these things I wasn't sort of seen or I wasn't heard as well. And it's that complexity that has to be held. I'm really glad that we have ACES, and it's not enough. ACES is catching up with what those of us who have been in movement work, who come from legacies of struggle and survival and fortitude, we know. And so we're glad the science is catching up. Welcome. And it's important that, like, again, we don't want to lose it, but we have to be really careful in systems change, looking at evidence-based practices. Those practices, again, are based on the slicing and dicing of the most structurally vulnerable communities, right? So let me do all this regression analysis and confound all these variables of your life to then decide what's a practice and a behavioral sort of model change for efficacy. Versus life is messy, right? 1 minute I may really sort of feel it, you know, be in this feeling, the next minute in this feeling. I don't even know why I'm behaving the way I'm behaving. How do we actually meet young people and our communities where we are to then create the kind of inquiry and learning and evaluation that actually meets us where we are in our real lives, not what works in a lab or in academia or in policy or systems, again, that are set up to be about compliance. How we feeling? Like, can we shout something out? I know the folks on the, you can shout something out in Richmond and Salinas too. I won't hear you, but I feel you.
That's here. Yay.
Oh, okay, I'm glad I'm here too. Yeah, good job. Thank you. Don't forget to breathe. But again, I think, and we struggle, like we are a trauma-informed organization. We, you know, are in sort of different policy settings, research settings around how do we ensure trauma-informed approaches are sort of included in our work. But we also know if racial justice, if gender justice, if queer justice aren't at the center of that, we cannot call it trauma-informed. Because we live in a culture and a system and a nation built on the dehumanization and subjugation of Black, brown, poor, queer bodies. And our systems run and rely on sort of this white tonality, again, of being good middle-class white people. And middle-class white folks can't even meet those standards. Like, so it's like false for everybody, but what's distinct is, though, folks of color don't get empathy when we don't meet that. White folks get empathy, right? And what can we do? How do we show up? Big investments, right? Now that we know ACES is out there, it's middle-class white folks who've had adversity. I'm not diminishing the pain. The pain is there, but the pain and the privilege are also separate. And the protection we get as separate. As someone who's over-educated, who lives a middle-class lifestyle, who knows how to, you know, as I've been told, knows how to talk white, you know, like all these things matter in sort of how we're able to show up and how we're seen and sort of what the leverage is. And so again, resilience, we truly believe that resilience is important. We have to affirm it. We are here. We got nothing to prove. Right? But we also know that communities that have been protected, white folks in this country might need to build their resilience to rupture the systems that protected them. Right? Yeah, well, go ahead. So resilience isn't, we're not dismissing it, but let's put it in a context. Right? So when we see funders, policy folks, practitioners say, well, how can we increase resilience? I'm like, so we want to increase our coping in the context of mass structural racism. Like, how can I continue to figure out how to just cope with it and let it be? And how can I, as someone who stewards many resources for an organization in a community that, you know, young people have entrusted us, how can we're getting, like, my job is to help you cope and figure out how to make you cope in a way that makes it easier for me to do my job. Versus supporting you and channeling and metabolizing your rage and your anger, your righteous rage and anger. I'll go to the next slide. If you are silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it. There is just immense silence for so many of us, and I say this as someone who I get to talk about this and do this work every day. There's still a silencing that happens around what it feels like. Because even for me, the risk of sharing what it feels like to walk into a room, and I always suss out, like, who's in the room, right? Am I the only one this? Or who else is there? or how out can I really be about who I really feel like I am, that I don't think that only folks of color, only young people, only queer folks feel that way, but there's history to that. There's actually sort of risk to our lives for actually being who we are. And that is legacy, that is structure, and that is distinct. And so I think this quote is really important, that part of, I think, the thing about resilience is we can do an ACEs screening, pediatric screening. What's going to be on the other side of that? Because what's needed is immense listening, immense witness bearing, immense love, the sort of immensity to hold profound pain without saying, here's your treatment, here's your solution, just letting it be. We've done everything we can to not have to do that through treatment models and modalities. I thought I was going to the next slide. Maybe I don't know. Okay. I wanted to, again, share this to, again, give you share with you directly from our young people, just sort of the sense, right? The sensory experience of what I've been talking about. And hopefully I will not do this. Again, beloved community, y'all, we got all we need.
Says YouTube isn't responding.
You know what I feel like? To not know that tomorrow will be my last day. I always have to look over my shoulder.
To be afraid that I'm a target.
This is what it feels like. This is what it feels like.
This is what it feels like.
This is what it feels like. This is what it feels like to be me.
So again, thank you for watching that, for bearing witness. And again, short clip. I think when you think about like viscerally having a target on my heart, on my gut, right, on my head, what that feels like. And I think what's important here is that there's, you know, being targeted sort of in that sort of physical, visceral way, but also feeling targeted, not knowing what it's going to feel like when I go to school. Having no sense of guarantee or predictability that I'm going to walk into a space where I'm going to be held with integrity, with love, with dignity. And what happens to our bodies when we're always sort of in threat mode, right? Like waiting, is something going to happen? You can't relax into a lesson plan, right? So a student can't do that, neither can the teachers. So it's everybody sort of impacted, right? Again, I know there's power differential, but I think part of what we have to understand is systems change starts with this video of young people feeling targeted, feeling the hypervigilance. So they're not being able to sometimes sit in class the way they need to. They get kicked out of class over and over again, leads to a, you know, suspension, multiple suspensions, school to prison pipeline. I mean, we see the systemic sort of pieces in play starting from the embodiment. And so what goes on in our bodies is a reflection, like our earth is sort of melting. I mean, we're also in sort of metabolic dissonance, right? There's a connection and a relationship to that that's going on. I'm going to stop right here. I just want to see, are there any questions, comments, thoughts, feelings you'd like to share out loud? Or, I don't know, from our folks in Salinas and Richmond?
We don't have any questions from Richmond just yet.
Okay. Yes?
I had a question about just the agency itself. What is it exactly that happens there?
Yeah.
Could you share?
Sure. So we're a youth organization. We work with young people ages 13 to 21 up to 24-ish. And we provide an array of services and supports in community health. We provide clinical, non-clinical case management, trauma response case management, but we also do like food justice programming. We do identity group programming. We have education and justice department, so working with young people who have been involved in the systems or are at acute risk of it, but also work with young people in school, out of school, etc. Media, art, and culture. All the videos you see were created by young people in partnership with our staff. A third of our staff, we have about 36 staff, have come up through our membership. So they were RYSE members and now are either assistants, coordinators, or managers. And that's really intentional, right? We want young people to know that this is their space in all the ways, and that's their visions that will continue to drive it. And so, you know, it's about leadership pipeline at RYSE, but our work is to build loving power to then be able to change the conditions of violence and distress, of white supremacy, you know, heteronormative supremacy, like to be able to really change, to be in leadership with consciousness. So that means city council, school board, chamber of commerce, certainly RYSE. But really, how do we look at, we know RYSE is part of a legacy, generations of legacy, so how do we contribute to legacy? So we provide those direct services and supports, but from those services and supports, like from our, so the proximity is where we lift up what are sort of the things within systems and the community that we have to look at in a different way, and how can we make broader shifts so then young people are coming in not because they're coping with distress, but because they're interested in sort of learning, being creative, trying something out they didn't, which we have, but we hope in 10, 20, 30, 100, 1,000 years, what RYSE is that we're not still doing trauma response work, right? That's really, we need to like actually eliminate this work. And that's what we try to do as an organization while we still need to meet the acute needs of young people. Thank you for the question. Any others right now? Okay. Let me ask you this. What's trauma? The thing we talk about and say a lot, but just what is it? What does it feel like? What does it sound like to you, look like? Yes.
Well, I would say it's an extraordinary incident that happens, and it would be different for everyone what would be trauma for them. Yeah. It must feel like overwhelming. Mm-hmm. So here it is. In every system in the body.
Extraordinary experience, very sort of personalized and unique for each person. Yep. Other thoughts? Yes.
Is it like an experience that causes high stress or maybe even fear?
Causes high stress or fear. Mm-hmm. Did you have your hand up? No. Okay.
Something that causes lasting harm.
Something that causes lasting harm. Yeah. Yes, all of that. So I want to offer some definitions of trauma that we sort of have come to understand in our own learning, and that we sort of apply in how we sort of address and employ healing-centered approaches. Okay, you didn't know you were going to do so much out loud reading, but could somebody read this quote or this definition out loud? Thank you.
Hyperarousal of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, and sympathetic nervous system with a marked weakness and activity in the orbital prefrontal cortex.
Thank you.
Which can cause trauma for those of us that are dyslexic. Just doing what you did. So, you know, it's amazing.
The definition on its own,
yeah.
What is it, right?
And
and reading it.
Aloud and having to decode it.
Yes.
While you're reading that. So there's all of those concerns.
That's right, thank you, thank you. So what we see is, and I'm gonna share the definitions that probably don't cause that kind of dysregulation as well. But this is a definition, right, that is used in, in the medical field, but also in many of the fields we work in. Could somebody read this definition out loud? Thank you.
Complex trauma is exposure to multiple traumatic events and the long-term impacts of exposure. Usually begins early in life and can disrupt many aspects of the child's development and the very formation of a self and ability to form a secure attachment bond.
Thank you. This definition. Thank you.
Historical trauma, the cumulative emotional and psychological wounding over the lifespan and across generations, emanating from massive group trauma.
Thank you. This definition? Thank you.
Racial oppression. Racial oppression is a traumatic form of interpersonal violence which can lacerate the spirit, scar the soul, and puncture the psyche.
Thank you. And then lastly here, trauma is living scared, susto. So I want to share some of what we've heard directly from our young folks. So trauma is when you are scared of where you are or wherever you go. You can also feel alert at all times. So that HPA access, right? Young people deal with a lot of stress, responsibility, isolation, and lost loved ones. It makes young people feel cautious, guilty, alone, angry, and sad. Complex, chronic, ongoing. My experience with violence is very brutal. I grew up with violence as if it were my sibling. Thinking about what it means to have a relationship to violence. So as an organization that does violence intervention work, violence prevention work, part of what we had to come to understand was that while young people felt like, how do I shift and change so I'm not worried or stuck in the violence, if it's a relationship, there's a loss in relationship. And we have to understand, we also have to acknowledge there's a loss. And so that's something like in the field of violence intervention, violence prevention, we have to say, where are we actually acknowledging and holding space for the loss of that relationship? That may be harmful, but it's still a relationship and there's still a tie to it. Being brown is already something that this society is trying to exterminate. Adding queerness on top of that and having patriarchy by its side is something I have to deal with on a daily. So young people have said they're very they're clear around what's going on for them, right? Even if they're not clear on what do I do, how do I feel, and I would say it's not just young people, it's adults, it's all of us. In our service to young people, it's how do we make sure we make space for the textured experience. So that if you're going to an education career program, it's like, oh, if you want to talk about what happened with your family, you have to go talk to a counselor. No, that's part of the process of education, right? Like fundamentally knowing there's an empathetic connection to someone who's supposed to be in a teaching or learning sort of space with you, and they can hold that conversation. Maybe it might make sense at some point to make a connection with a counselor or someone else, but in that moment, our ed and career coordinator's job is to hold that space for that conversation and see where does it make sense to then help figure out with your assignment. Right, or filling out your FAFSA application. We also ask about healing, and we know that as much as resilience is a baseline, we also are healing all the time. We have a lot of work to do, and I think we also have to move healing from individual and episodic to structural, and to relational, and to conditional. And so healing, what we've heard, looks like this. Healing looks like education. If people understood their privilege and how their actions can deeply affect someone, I think it would help a lot of people who are struggling with these issues. Can I have somebody read this quote out loud? Yes, thank you.
We know we can't run the city. It's too but our experience and our voices should count, especially because we're the most affected.
Thank you. And this last quote, could somebody read it? Thank you.
Realizing institutions don't work for you, but against you, is the first step to healing your community.
Thank you. So I know we have, like I said, we have clinical staff on site. We have 2 therapists, and one of the things that we know is important in our sort of clinical mental health model and how it integrates is that we don't do anger management. We do, how do we help you channel your rage? We don't think anger should be managed. We think it's a rightful experience, a natural experience, and so to manage it, again, is about how do we help you be compliant so the systems can keep running how they run, right? And we can bill and diagnose it versus there's no diagnosis for rage. But that's actually what we need to acknowledge and affirm. And so for young people to say, like, when I come to you with a problem and it's like, I'm not going to school, the question isn't, well, what do you need to change your behavior to go into school, right? You need to sort of, just like get motivated. It's, yeah, that might be part of it. We're going to start with that. Because part of acknowledging school isn't safe for our young people, for a lot of our young people. It's not, and if they don't even say it's not safe, it's not comfortable. So we also have to acknowledge, like, yeah, you are actually trying to figure out how to be part of something that's not necessarily set up for you, that's not attuned to you. But we also want to talk about if we don't go, what could happen and what can we do? How do we sort of move in the journey, right? So that could look like, what's the class you really like? Is there a teacher you really like, right? Can we connect with that person, right? And it has to look different for everybody. And so again, that acknowledging the social sort of ecology of violence that young people have to be in distress, that we need you to say it. When you say it, that in itself feels like relief. Because I feel like that it's not just me thinking I'm a victim, right? And young people are really thinking about this, like, I know I need to sort of straighten up. I know I need to figure it out. But again and again, I can't. So something must be wrong with me versus, no, you're trying to actually get through a system that is actually looking at metrics that don't reflect who you are, don't reflect your dreams and hopes, but you're still showing up. Thank you for doing that. That's amazing. And yeah, we've got some stuff we want to work on. Okay, this is a lot. This is a lot, everybody. But it's also, this is the world we're in. As an organization, again, an organization that we are trauma-informed, healing-centered, but we also knew that we needed to assert what healing, what trauma, distress, and healing means for us. So then when we're in these spaces where trauma is sort of reduced to episodes, to individual, to pathology, we have to say, well, no, trauma actually is embedded into nation building. Like, nation building is itself a traumatic experience and has legacy. And so then what that means for how we run a gardening program, like, it means something for that. Connecting back to the land, right? And so this is our sort of framework around trauma and healing, but really looking at, it's about history, legacy, structure, it's about systems and institutions, community and place, and individual and interpersonal. What you'll see is ACEs is here, right? So it's in there. It should be in there. Adverse childhood, adverse community experiences, we say adverse capitalist experiences, like, it's all in there. But if we just started from ACEs as an organization committed to our liberation, we would be remiss. It would be a mismatch. Because ACEs is still about what are the things that happen to you that then created these sort of health outcomes or health status. But there's still, like, for our young people, they could fill out the ACEs questionnaire. I could fill it out, and it could look how it looks, but there's no treatment modality that's in the DSM or that's in the clinical model that's going to address that. And I would say that's for most of us, even those of us who are structurally protected. We also know it's so important that we have sort of how we look at liberation and healing in these sort of layers as well. So when we think about our work as an organization, we look at this and say, how are our programs running on the liberation and healing side? So the left side is, again, it's like context and conditions, right? We have to name it to be able to address it. How we address it is, are we doing these things, and how does it look? What we also know is it can't just be one organization. It can't just be one program. It can't be sort of one event. That this work requires sort of collectivizing, right, across sectors, across disciplines, across movements. So ACEs, I'm not going to go over this a lot. Some of you have seen this. We also felt like it was important. So again, we're glad there's ACEs, right? It's that hook, that sort of science hook that legitimizes what we already know, what we've been doing. We don't have to defend or explain ourselves in certain ways like we've had to for many generations. But we also know that it doesn't just start at conception. And so we had to expand sort of what we understood around ACEs and really shift the frame around risk it's about coping. And that when we look at risk, it's sort of a measure of structural oppression and structural vulnerability, not about individual ability, capacity, motivation, or morality. And I've talked about sort of through the presentation, sort of how do we build beloved communities? So I wanted to just share, you know, in case I didn't, like, what are the things we do as an organization, but also as an organization that's part of many movements, right? So we recently created a theory of liberation rather than a theory of change, because we felt like a theory of change still sort of allows the same kind of systems to be what they are, and it's just about if we change and reform. So I know I'm talking about the 3 R's of systems change, but we're also talking about systems transformation. And that means some systems have to be deconstructed, ruptured, we have to build new ones, we have to build our own. But in that, how do we do that? And so we prioritize relationship in everything we do. So that's across our programs, our protocols, our policies, our partnerships, that if we have something that feels like it's actually going to be disconnected, we have to address that. And again, we are not perfect, we are not neat and tidy, but what we've come to understand is that like all our programs are platforms to build loving, healing relationships. So we're glad we helped 50 young people do their resumes and get job interviews. That's not unimportant. But if they didn't feel loved, held, respected in that process, we have failed, right? So maybe we met the funder outcome. That's easy, honestly. Funder outcomes are not that hard, except that we have to comport to them, right? But we have to be bigger and bolder than any of the current systems outcomes that are out there. And so what that means, though, being bold is just mean like I'm actually showing up for your humanity before I'm showing up for my logic model, right? I'm going to defend our humanity before I defend our widgets of work. We honor resilience and resistance. Like our healing is so much also embedded in our willingness and our ability and our fortitude to resist the systems of dehumanization and the practices of it. The fact that we show up, sort of where we show up, we feel like that needs to be affirmed more. So when young people come to RYSE, it's not, oh, well, what happened to you? What's wrong with you needing to come here? I know the trauma-informed sort of shift is what happened to you, but we don't even ask that. We're like, thank you for coming. Tell us about your journey here. Is there any ways we can make it feel easier, less stressful, right? So it's affirmation. Said this before, we acknowledge injustice and harm. And young people said this over and over again. I don't know anything about RYSE, but I know that you say the truth when it needs to be said, right? We don't always know even what to do when there's injustice. We, you know, over the last few years, and our folks in Richmond know this, you know, members of our police department have been involved in trafficking of young women. And it took a lot of work to actually sort of have some kind of movement by the systems in the city to address it, but no one was saying anything. And so taking a stance as an organization, we took a public stance and said, we need there to be some action. We need to protect our children That in itself, it didn't solve everything, right? But young people said, I know that RYSE is going to say what needs to be said. And we have to be the adults to say the stuff that makes us shake, right? That feels risky in our work. But that's the work. That's the relationship work. That's the resilience work, the resistance work. We have to pause to grieve. So at RYSE, we have held funerals for young people. We've held celebrations of life. When the federal administration, as it continues to sort of throw assault after assault, we have had to sort of stop to check in with ourselves, with our staff, as well as our members and our partners. Like, can we just say this is not okay? Let's not normalize this. And we have to also make sure that we stop to celebrate and affirm. We have to do that too. And then risk taking. We take principled risks. We cannot be about systems change without taking risks. And so what that looks like for all of us, I mean, for us, a risk, sure, we made a public statement around the behaviors of our police department. And the risk to that was we had really sort of worked to create at least a transparent, solid relationship. We still continue to work in that because young people need us to have those relationships. But it doesn't come without sort of visceral response, right? Like, we're all still in our bodies around it, but the way that we sort of move through it is in community, to be in relationship. We encourage and invest in collective and personal care. So at RYSE, and we feel like we're still figuring this out, but making sure there's ample time off for staff. I mean, staff are holding, and staff working directly with young people day in and out are really sort of holding a lot, their own stuff, but also what's coming up. So how do we make sure we can have space for that? And again, we stumble, we're trying to figure it out, but just that investment in it is key. We have a system we call balance buddies. So we have someone that we pair up with across departments, across positions, who's there to help sort of support us in our own personal ecology, but also to sort of, celebrate milestones at work or in our personal life. So it's not a coach, it's not a therapist, it's not your supervisor, but it's someone who's in the team saying, I see you and you see me. And so that's what we feel like is really important too. So we're also sort of not just sort of, breaking a hierarchy, but also acknowledging we know there's hierarchy, but we also, the relationship is most important. Talk about how we affirm, we apologize. We apologize for things we've done, missteps we've taken as an organization. We also apologize on behalf of others. I think that's a big piece for our work, especially as adults. How can we apologize for others? Because so often, and I think about all the folks I still am waiting for an apology from, right? But what does help is when people say that shouldn't have happened, right? And let me be the one to say that should never happen, I apologize. And so how do we be that, that proxy in some ways until we can sort of really build and collectivize the sense of beloved community? And then, like I said, we have a good time at RYSE. So when you come to RYSE, I mean, you can't not have a good time. It's like not even allowed, right? So you'll see, there's music, there's art, we laugh a lot. So in the midst of sort of all that's going on, I mean, the joy that we feel it's just as important to sort of uplift, to invest in, right? We're not just about fixing problems, right? We're about really lifting up dreams, hopes, and being in that space, being in that imaginary space with each other. And we keep learning, right? Like, we also know where we were 10 years ago, where we were 5 years ago, where we were last year is going to be different. So we never see ourselves like we're not experts. We have expertise, but we're always in learning mode. And part of being in community like this is to see like not just what are the questions, but what else can we learn about being in a relationship. And so we appreciate so much the opportunity to have time, have space, but also really look forward to questions, gentle pushback, right? Be tender in our relationships, strident in our values, but how can we sort of continue to learn so that, again, we're showing up and we see each other and hold each other. I think I have one more video to show. Am I okay on time? Yeah, okay, so this is about a 4.5-minute video, so I just want you to, I want to be predictable. So then I'm going to show this and then wanted to open it up for whatever time we have.
Teach yourself how to love yourself. You are beautiful in every single way. So understand every single day that the woman's in your own way. Too lost to how to break out and sing your song. I'm free. I'm free. No trauma is the new me. You better know what you are worth. You got to believe. Use your wings when I break. It's time to go be worth. It's time to know your worth. It's time to go be worth. It's time to go. Time to go. Time to go be worth. We can still repent. Forgiveness to ourselves for all of our sins. Though it may be difficult for us to win, leave our lanes with the base, and we don't need it. He is all love and comes across. We don't care, cause we focus on rise. We looking for fair. Shoot at the other side, prepared, not scared. Fire and reflections, no thinking of cost. Every other minute, black dress is bought for a mother. Cover of a child being caught by a bullet chain blade. Got a break from my brain. See the bigger picture, extend my mind frame. Open the door for women, no more bitch talk. Spending time with our kids, take on up to the fall. No need for heat on any street you can walk. Leave the shoulder ways outlined in chalk. You are not blind to the dust. You better know what you are worth. You gotta keep believing. Use your wings when I break. It's time to go be worth. It's time to know your worth. It's time to go be worth. It's time to go. Time to go. Time to go be worth. Centuries. We have been made very active. Jezebels, Maggie, housewives, hooker, with our bodies are more temple than tackle. They are more scripture than street corner, a sacred silhouette where our holy lights twist from our scalp like roots in inscriptions. Without water, it's hard to grow. Without natural blood, it's hard to flow. We have been mixed and massive, opportune and packaged into this basket mentality. Basket, straight hair, soft spoken, wrap our bellies with waist trainers, trained to ankle makes us so beautiful. If we don't shrink ourselves so much until we disappear. It's time for us to reclaim our things. It's time for us to be seen, to be heard. We are heroes. Royalty in our hands. Strong, beautiful, black, brown, thin, and thin. And we are here, tapping down the free form of God, exposing the flower of emotions held hostage behind rib cage. We are learning to love ourselves. It's time to shed our baggage, not singing the smooth break out that's cool and fly, and fly, and fly. It's time to go be worth. It's time to know your worth. It's time to go be worth. It's time to go, time to go. You are not blind to the God. You better know what you are worth. You got to believe. Use your wings when I break. It's time to go be worth.
Time for the rebirth.
Excuse me? Was that it?
That was it.
Okay.
All right. That's all I got. So again, thank you for making the time, taking the time. But just, I don't know how much time will we have for questions.
I think about 10.
Okay. Yes.
So, it's funny that I attended today because I've been trying to figure out how to make our agency, we're doing a lot of work with grief and loss, and part of our department has that trauma competent caregiving for foster youth. But is there an approach that you use to transform the entire agency? Is there a type of modality that you use, or is it just what was the best practice?
Around sort of grief and loss.
Well, with just being a
trauma, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think part of the sort of, again, the opportunity, and I think then the responsibility of saying we're trauma informed, that being trauma informed means it's the whole system. And so, you know, we really see our values as kind of aligned to sort of trauma informed principles: leadership, creativity, justice and equity, fun, partnership. But it also looks like sort of when you sort of walk into the space and sort of what you see, who you see, what's available to you. And then, you know, we're also very adaptive. So, you know, like I said, for members, like we've held funeral services, we've held celebrations of life, but that's all based on where the young people and the community members who are most closest, what's going to be helpful for them. And so really work sort of from that place of sort of really being proximate, coming from inquiry, giving space, because we also know just as you ask something doesn't mean someone has the answer. So I think it's being nimble and adaptive like that. And, you know, also across all our sort of policies and protocols. So we employ restorative and sort of nonviolent communication, and that's with staff, with members, but also with staff and with partners. So we have a protocol that applies to everyone. It's not like that's the youth protocol and that's the adult protocol. No, we all actually have to do it. Being trauma informed means I can't ask a young person to do something or be something that I wouldn't, right? Or if there's something they have to fill out, like an intake form, if I wouldn't fill it out, or if I'm unsure about it, then why am I going to ask or require that that happens? So those kinds of things, they're big, but I mean, they're B big, like capital B big, but also big, like, but it's those kinds of things. And so how do we make the connections? But again, we're also learning. We have like a 14-page safety and protocol practice. That's how do we ensure safety that's aligned with our values, but knowing that we have to be ready for acute threats that happen, right? Because we have to ensure young people feel safe. When we first opened our doors or we were planning, we were told we need metal detectors, we need cameras, you know, we need to hire people who know how to handle these kids, right? We have not had a violent sort of incident or altercation with young people in our space for over 10 years, and we have none of that, right? But we are diligent. We pay attention to everything, to energy, right? We notice something about members. When we hear something going on in the community, we check in about it. So it's that kind of attunement that's so critical, right? No one makes any decision alone around sort of a situation, right? Either, like it's all done sort of in teams. That's also being important too, part of our co-regulation. I might be impacted by an incident in a particular way that actually impacts my professional decision-making or ability to see what needs to happen. So I need someone to help support that. That's helpful. I mean, I could go on, you know, but, put your hand up, Bethany.
Yeah, so I've been trying to figure out how to ask this question, but I feel like, especially when we talk about young people, a lot of times we use the word entitlement as sort of a negative thing, like young people are so entitled, and this, that, or the other. But I feel like so often, especially kids coming from backgrounds that are from more difficult backgrounds, don't come with what they should have, which is a sense of entitlement. Like, how do you say to a kid, how do you help a kid get to the point where they feel like, of course they have higher expectations of other people and of other institutions, and you know, that they feel like they should be able to walk into a store or a restaurant or deal with a person and be treated as a person.
Yeah.
Like, how do you help them get there?
Yeah.
Is there a way?
So, and I forgot to repeat the first question, so hi everyone. The sort of question or sort of grappling is, how do we look at sort of the way there's a narrative about young people being being entitled, and sort of what's underneath that, right? And I just want to make sure I'm hearing this correctly. what are we missing when that's the narrative we put? Is that?
Well, and then some kids, I mean, this entitlement is good.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you, and if
Yeah.
someone isn't feeling entitled, how do you help them
Yeah.
feel entitled?
Okay, so there's like, okay, so let me pose it this way. I think, yeah, entitlement's a tricky word, because I think there's also a piece about, maybe there's too much entitlement for some communities, right? So it's not just a, let me increase, you know, entitlement for my community or with me, but it actually is, because again, that entitlement is sort of, it lends itself and sort of steers to these middle-class white subjectivities, right? And so it's tricky that way. Certainly affirmation, kids should be able to be kids, right? What we know is that, you know, we've got funding towards like career sort of job skills for like 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds. They should be able to be kids, right? So there's something about that. Why are we sort of investing in when it's like, no, job training should be, let a kid be a kid, right? Whatever that means, like play, right? Exploration, contemplation. So those kinds of things I think we have to think about. And so entitlement, that yeah, they should be entitled to actually be children because they are children. So we have to make room for that. Sometimes we have to push back on people, but we also have to build those spaces. But the notion of entitlement, like there's the increasing resilience, increasing efficacy, right? And again, it's this, the frame is, you know, it's communities that low SES, right? High rates of this, high rates of that. But I would argue, someone who's, again, overeducated, maybe I need to be pathologized because I'm too much SES, too much efficacy, right? There's a way that we have to sort of flip that around too, and what's the pathology around that it creates, but doesn't get scrutinized in the same way that our communities do. We're over-surveilled and under-resourced because our resources have been extracted from us. Never have short answers. Other questions? I see two hands this way. We'll go around the room. Yeah, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, on one of your slides, you're saying resilience is a baseline and not a benchmark. So if we were to throw out, I think you did in your presentation, what I would consider benchmarks, but to give some examples of what some of those would be, and what you've achieved, not as much achievements, but benchmarks in that context.
So our two primary domains of sort of benchmarks are young people feel loved. So every young person who is part of RYSE feels loved by RYSE. And we actually ask them that specifically in our sort of evaluation, in our inquiry. And then our other domain is systems responsible for young people love young people. And so those are our domains. And so what that looks like, we have key objectives. It's sort of, you know, we drilled them down some bit, but like it is about making sure young people feel loved. That is our work as an organization. That is what's going to make us free. That is what's going to liberate us. That's what's going to give us the room to build our own systems. And so in that, yeah, we run programs. Again, meeting funder outcomes are not that hard, right? I mean, what's hard is we have to do double speak, triple speak, because we have to help them understand, right? Or help us understand. I know there might be funders in the room. But also in partnership. Like, we have to remember the resources that we get based on these metrics, those are resources that were extracted over generations. From that's our young people's money. It's their dollars, not the funders, not the systems. But that's the trick of capitalism, is if you have the money, you're somehow seen as the one who knows or should be able to control. So part of our work is how are we in partnership? There's things that our funders can tell us, help us understand and learn, but we have the expertise around what makes most sense to do that. But and I'm happy to share, like, our theory of liberation lays out all our impact areas. It's on our website. And across our departments, we have organizational goals that all our departments then work towards.
Time for one more question.
Okay, we had two hands up. Can we do two? Yeah, two quick ones. Yeah. Did you have your hand up? Yeah.
I don't have a question.
Okay. It doesn't have to be a question.
I was going to say that I know somebody firsthand who benefited from RYSE.
Oh.
My cousin, TJ.
TJ.
Yeah.
Oh, hi TJ. Oh, hi TJ.
TJ is actually like on the path to like being incarcerated, but he ended up getting involved in RYSE, and he grew up in like, came from a two-parent household, but his mother died suddenly when he was a child, and so out of all these things I can see like how they like changed him, like he's making like the whole change in narrative. So I just want to say like your work is pretty effective. So
Thanks.
I think the foundation is strong.
We're fortunate that TJ chose us. Yeah, thank you. Well, that's kind of beautiful. Family. All right, yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Laura.
thanks everybody.
So Kanwarpal is actually available to stay afterwards with us a little bit if folks want to ask her any additional questions. We have about 15 minutes left with each other, and I'm feeling very inspired by her presentation. And also, in the spirit of the learning communities, I want to at least take just a few minutes for us to honor humanity and relationship, because I think that is an inspirational note to wrap things up on. So if folks can just briefly, you don't have to think about these questions and you don't have to respond to them, but if folks can just stand up, stretch, and introduce yourself to somebody that you don't know, and just share something that inspired you today. I think that would be a great way to wrap up. Or you can delve into these questions if you'd like as well. Take about 5 minutes to do that. If Richmond folks can take some time to do that as well, and then we'll come back together and then close up. Okay, so if we can just regroup. folks here in Napa as well as folks here in Richmond. It looks like we got disconnected from Salinas, but Richmond is still here with us. So if anybody in this room just really quickly wants to share popcorn style, one thing that sparked inspiration with them, something they learned that was new today.
It's
Yes.
not new, but it was just really powerful to think again about not pathologizing individuals because we live in a really dysfunctional culture.
Yeah.
And to think about that instead of, facing a person.
Great, great, thank you. Any other thoughts from Napa before we move over to Richmond? Okay, any thoughts from Richmond? If you want to unmute our Richmond folks so that we can hear their lovely voices.
We've unmuted them, but they haven't unmuted us.
Oh, Richmond, can you unmute, please? Unless you would just like to chat, we can also read aloud your thoughts.
They're giving us that it's not us, it's you.
Okay. Well, Richmond, just holler if you want to interject before we wrap up. I want to thank everybody for being here in the space today. It was truly inspirational having our guest speaker here. And we hope to see you again at our final event, our final learning community for this series, for this Resilient series, which is taking place on June 19th, which is also a Wednesday. And we will be emailing out more details about the time as well as the speaker information. So please stay tuned and visit our website for more information. And I don't know, Michelle, do you have any other thoughts you'd like to share? We did hand out evaluations. Please do fill them out, both sites, before you go. It's really important to have that information from you so that we know what's working, what's not.
I would just echo and say thank you very much for you taking your time and energy to be here today and learn more. And thank you very much for being here and for our speakers. Let's give another round of applause. Please, I've got like 3 or 4 ideas of things I want to do, and the listening campaign was one that I wrote down, and we will be doing more with Resilient Napa. So please sign up on the website for the newsletter, and we will make sure that we keep you on the loop so that you can come and share your stories and ideas and invite your networks of people.